and flop in between YouTube and Facebook in terms of the comments.
Okay. So you want me to go live on Facebook?
No.
Just look at the comments.
Okay.
So for
we live, by the way.
You are our eyes and ears and perception.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So I'm on Facebook now, and
we live.
Yeah. So
all right, and we live on YouTube. All right, check that for me. Boom. So we back again today, Gilded Sages, another conversation, another day, another hour, and this crazy COVID still here. So I'm gonna just start off by again introducing myself, Devon Lassine, TheeBlackAngloSaxon, my housemates,
Quentin Horton, and InquisitiveQ.
Look at you, man.
I'm bringing intelligent, bro.
But and then we also have our housemate Quan the Poet in the building.
Yes, sir.
And so today we just are here to talk to you all about another topic.
We here today. We here today.
We here today.
Yeah.
And I like this conversation because it is a hot button topic, has been a hot button topic throughout the history and dawn of America. You know, W.E.B. Du Bois, Booker T, the talented Tim.
Wait a minute, he's talking shit about me now.
Yeah, and so what we're getting into today is a conversation about tokenism. We're having this conversation because of a myriad of things, but the most recent thing that brought me to this space and to the discussion of tokenism. What is it? How has it changed? And how do we engage with it as the quote unquote American society? Because I think it differs from each society that you move in, because of the racial politics that we have here in America, on top of, or better yet, underneath of the class systems that are cross-cultural, but also intercultural in a lot of ways. So again, before we get started, if you can like the video, share the video, comment, because we want to engage, we need the engagement. This is a project centered around having discourse as one of the biggest things and proponents that I feel like happens in how we've gotten here in terms of American politics, in terms of our social discourse, is not knowing how to have productive levels of discourse, as well as on top of
have your drinks though.
Go ahead, get your libations. In the words of Yvette Carnell, get your libations. But so with that being said, we like to over here, we like to do things with articles and with facts. So to start the conversation on tokenism, I want to bring it to one of the articles. So what I'm gonna go ahead and do, give me 1 second, and I'm about to go ahead and share this screen with you all. The first one we have up though is from the Atlantic, and it is a article talking about the actual misrepresentation of Blackness in America, and how in American politics, but in America in general, as it kind of moves over also into corporate sex. As what happens is it talks about basically not having a certain level of influence overall when you talk about assimilation into America. Give me 1 second. Yep, and there we go. So here we are, first article of the day, and it is the false promise of Black political representation. Record numbers of African Americans hold elective office, but the policy preferences of Black voters remain unlikely to be enacted. This is from 2015, Nicholas Stephanopoulos. And for those who, again, have the whole thing about why are you talking about old articles, understand that these things are still relevant. Old articles does not mean it isn't relevant. So when you say something is old, make sure you're saying that it's not relevant and not just old. Make that distinction.
Before you go into that,
go ahead.
Because that's my whole thing. Old does not mean irrelevant. Old sometimes just means it was buried within its time. So just because it didn't catch the zeitgeist or the popular imagination at the time does not mean it doesn't hold value. And I was just going to yours.
So, I take my little notes. So it starts. One answer is that the appearance of Black political clout is deceiving. Despite their gains in participation and representation, Blacks continue to fare worse than whites in converting their policy preferences into law. This poor performance is more revealing than statistics on turnout or Black electoral success. And even though it causes remain mysterious, it is very much a rational frustration. No, very much a rationale for frustration with the status quo. My apologies. In a recent study, I analyzed group political power at the federal and state levels. At the federal level, I relied on remarkable database compiled by Princeton political scientist Martin Gillens. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. It includes response to thousands of survey questions from the last few decades. Crucially, it also tracks whether each policy referred to by a question was adopted by the federal government over the next 4 years. At the state level, I measured people's ideologies using exit polls. That's after the fact that the voting process is taking place. That asks whether they are liberal, moderate, or conservative. And I assess state laws using an index of overall policy. This is the doozy though, right? At both levels, I found that Blacks hold much less sway than whites. For example, a federal policy with no white support has only 10% chance of being enacted, while one with universal white support has 60% shot of adoption. But while a proposal with no Black support has 40% chance of becoming law, one enjoying unanimous approval has only a 30% probability of enactment. In other words, as support for a policy rises within the Black community, the odds of it being achieved also actually decline. And so I'm gonna start right there because that's a lot. And what I want to do is kind of go into the dynamic of it though, in terms of when we talk about and when we look at the idea that when you have this political climate where we like to say that things are polarizing, right?
Yeah, divisive.
Very divisive. What this speaks to is a division that has already been sown. And when we talk about and bring it back to tokenism, we have to begin to talk about the mechanics and the behaviors that go into tokenism versus the identities of tokenism. Because we all understand that,
Well, hold on for a second, if I can jump in. So what you're saying is, instead of looking at the aesthetic of tokenism, we want to see how tokenism plays out. Basically, just because I'm a guy who wears Sperry's boat shoes and I wear polo shorts doesn't necessarily mean, in a polo shirt, doesn't necessarily mean that I'm a token. There can just be, well, that's how I was raised, versus someone who can come in with Jordans, the black denim and everything else. They can also be a token because of how they think versus how they look. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. Okay. Because I'll use myself as a case study, right? And what you see is I am more, or my presentation has been more urban, given where I was socialized.
Stop. We're gonna stop there. It's not urban. It's urbane. Add the E. Add the E. It matters. Add the E. Urbane, because it's
got you.
You're a stylish hoe. It's okay.
It is, and that speaks to a certain level of assimilation as America as a whole. Because when we talk about tokenism and when we talk about how it looks versus how it functions, you get lost in the idea that, well, this person who quote unquote has a, say, white spouse is necessarily deemed a token, when that person mechanically and ideologically can be an advocate for the community that they come from. And when you talk about, what's up, boss?
Oh, I just wanted to read off the definition and see if.
Go ahead, read off the definition.
All right, so according to dictionary.com, tokenism, the practice of making only a perfunctory or symbolic effort to do a particular thing, especially by recruiting a small number of people from underrepresented groups in order to give the appearance of sexual or racial equality within a workforce.
Yep. Because that, and again, that speaks to it all in terms of people being positioned, and it comes down to what it is, what the person's intent is in terms of how they're using themselves or how they're allowing themselves to be used as everything.
So you're saying
narrative narrative as well as outcome. Because what happens is everything is a transaction in America. Every relationship comes down to a transaction. Every act, everything that we move on are transactional, even when it's not necessarily fiat currency, for lack of a better word. And what happens is you have to understand that if I go into a space to, for example, be the diversity coin of an institution to provide them cover
in what sense?
Cover in the sense that I'll allow them to not act or embody the behaviors of being diverse, but allow them for cover to say, oh, we all know I got one black friend, or not even just the black friend. I got that one female friend, or I got that one gay friend, because we gonna get into a deeper conversation around who can be tokens and how we all in this American system have been tokenized in terms of participating in this quote unquote, hyper capitalistic environment. When we talk about matriculating through America comes down to assimilating.
You make me wish I added Billy Porter. I'm going right. I'm listening.
No, go ahead.
No, what I mean by that is that because when we had the production meeting, I wasn't thinking that the scope was going to expand beyond just the Black American narrative. I was focused on, as we're going to bring in later, Justin Simeon and Dear White People with Antoinette Robinson. I fucking love her performances, as in Coco and Dear White People. But when I hear about that and the scope in which we're going into, it really is that tokenism isn't about I'm better than those Negroes. That's why I deserve this job. As far as in tokenism being a performance, tokenism being this way of allowing institutions to no longer, I say no longer as if they ever had participated in it. What I mean by is when I hear you say covered, as in CYA, cover your own ass, as in that tokenism allows for a better visual representation rather than the actual representation. And with the dichotomy, or the difference in between the two is that actual representation affects thousands, potentially tens of thousands to millions. But then tokenism only affects the individual who is able to benefit from furthering the institution's aims of basically gathering more audiences.
Yes.
So that's what's interesting to me.
Yeah.
And I hear that.
That's exactly what I'm speaking to. And especially using ourselves in terms of how we've been able to matriculate, and we both can attest to the fact that the idea is that me as the urbane black nigga boy, I am the one who is supposed to, when it comes down to, and we can use politics as an example, as it happens in politics a lot, is I'm supposed to herd that group of people. And whatever you come from, you are supposed to be that herder of that group in terms of it creating a false narrative that allows people not to be held accountable. And so when we have like the conversations now that people are having about like Kamala Harris, whether it be Stacey Abrams, whether it be Candace Owens, whether it be Herman Cain, whether it be Thomas Sowell, like any of these people who quote unquote Clarence Thomas, who have these very, very, very different stances from the community, automatically being classified as tokens. But we have where Clarence Thomas, who would be considered a token, Kamala Harris publicly, or I would say in popular opinion, isn't necessarily considered a token in the same way when she understands and embodies very, very individualistic endeavors in terms of her approach to politics, which she has said from her own mouth, in terms of, yes, I will allow myself to, and that's why we're here at this whole identity crisis right now, because on one hand, I'm allowing one organization to use me as an African American, then I'm allowing another organization to use me as an Indian American, then I'm allowing another organization to use me as an Asian American, and so on and so forth. But what happens is you are essentially bringing your people, your collectives that you are a part of, into that space. And that's the mechanics of it, because she can look any kind of way that she wants. She can talk how she wants. She can have the stances. But when we talk about the intent of it, I think we must begin to, as a community, focus on that part of the conversation more than, go ahead.
No, but you finish.
More than what a person is saying and judging a person by their quote unquote stances, and we're casting them into buckets in that way, because we're making these cookie cutter analysis or assessments about people when that isn't always necessarily the case in the matter.
Okay. This is where I'm gonna jump in there, and because it's layered. And the layer that I want to get to is ask you, are you saying that when we come to Kamala Harris, we have a case example in which we have a political leader, which is basically a Rachel Dolezal?
Yes.
In the sense that she wants to matriculate and speak to a number of different heritages within America, which we all know that any heritage in America is weighted. But she wants to speak and have the power of speaking to a number of heritages as this token, as in, okay, I carry the baton for these people, but it's like you can't carry the baton for Asian Americans, you can't carry the baton for Black Americans, and you can't carry these batons because they're so heavy and they're so weighted. Whereas Kamala Harris and I have to say this, from the left gets a pass, whereas anyone from the right who, and going back to Candace Owens had this thing in AP News and Facebook flagged it, talking about it was false. Facebook makes me laugh. It's like, when it comes out of political discussions, Facebook needs to shut the F up. It's like, you don't know enough. You are a platform. We use you as a tool, as citizens.
And we'll get to that, because they are tokens as well.
They are. It's like, we need you to be quiet. Understand that public discourse is nasty. Understand that public discourse will never be nice. Understand that public discourse is really a thing about seeing where the problems are. But going back to Kamala Harris, what I'm hearing from you is that Kamala Harris wants a number of organizations for political wagering, political clout, for political capitalism, is willing to be silent and allow them to project upon her identity and identity politics, which doesn't favor us. Because going back to the article with the Atlantic, it doesn't favor us in the sense that 60% of the articles that are favored by white people are passed, and 10% that aren't favored by white people aren't passed. That Kamala Harris, in vying for the Black vote, does not hope or help the Black population. Is that what you're saying? That Kamala Harris?
That's exactly what I'm saying. Because what happens is, and going back to the article, when they say, okay,
They the
Atlantic, 10% chance of being inactive, right? 10% chance. So when you're entering an institution, and like we discussed on our video about Joe Biden previously when we were talking about Obama, I am willing to have the conversation, but we have to choose one. Is Obama confined by the constraints of race, and he is ultimately just another token in a diversity play for the institution that is America? Because I think people forget that America is an institution, and it has to provide face and cover.
It does.
So is he that, or do we have our own agency? But when we talk about a study from decades that had taken place and people still not necessarily having a sway, what I think we have to do as a community is get away from these overly symbolic gestures, right? And I'm not saying you have to drag her and call her out her name and all of that, because that's overboard. But at the same time, there does have to be an assessment of, okay, if we're allowing this individual to rise to right now, everything is, well, this is such an historic moment. I'm so enamored by the moment with emotions and feelings and all of this thing and all of these things around her being the quote unquote first African-American president. But then you also have people who don't want to have a conversation about the cultural heritage that she stems from, when you can't necessarily have it both ways, because now you're allowing yourself to be used and you aren't necessarily doing any service to either group. But
I get what you're saying. And I interject here because it's the perfect time. And that when you say allow yourself to be used, I want to interject the counter argument that some people just want to be a part of a moment. They just want to be a part of a moment. And Kamala Harris, as well as, because I remember working at the Board of Elections and Ethics when it was BOEE inside of district government in 2008 when Barack Obama was elected. I remember hearing those results before it went public, before he was behind the great screen of understanding and writing on myself, gone fishing. Because a lot of people believe with identity politics, because a person identifies as a certain thing, that their political outlook is the same. And PBS Frontline has always pointed out that Barack Obama was not as strong on racial politics as much as he was as using racial identity as a way to fight the GOP. And this is why, again, as an independent, I am staunchly critical of the DNC. Is that the DNC likes to promise that it sees the common man, it sees the common woman, it sees the Black American woman, it sees the white American man in the middle of the Red Sea that does not have access to high-income jobs. The DNC, the Democratic Party, likes to pretend that it has the common person's interest at heart, and that the GOP is the corporate monsters. But when you look at Kamala Harris and when you look at Joe Biden, you see a pattern of behavior. This is what I'm hearing from you, as well as I agree to. There's a behavioral pattern of individualism. There's a behavioral pattern of I'm willing to forego the history of the punitive side of what happens, because we all know that she was a prosecutor in California, in which they suppressed her record in California. By they, I mean whoever the parties were. They suppressed her record, but this is where Candace Owens always wins. Candace Owens wins by pointing out where the DNC is being duplicitous. What I mean by duplicitous is they play on both sides. It's like you can't call out the GOP for being racist, but you participate in racism and white supremacy. And so when the DNC gets called out, I myself as an independent have to go, they got you. I have to call out Candace Owens and say, not call out, but praise Candace Owens for saying, yes, she is a voice that we need when it comes down to Black American women. That not every Black American woman has the same ideology. And what the DNC likes to do is likes to think that every Black American woman does not like a Black American man. And the DNC likes to put that Black American women are the saviors of white liberalism. And they like to use Black American women inside of the corporate America to say that, oh my God, look how long we've been punishing Black American women.
That's why it's a backbone. And that's a great pivot too.
Go ahead. I'm not going to finish on this point because I'm being a smart ass at this point, but it's true. It's like, oh my God, we need to elevate Black American women. We need to put them in a place where they have power. But we put them in a place where they have power only if they accept, back to the article, white American ideals. We do not elevate Black American women who, going back to hood feminism, or speaking of hood feminism, do not speak on how white American women and women who aspire to be a part of the corporate profits feed into the patriarchal society, quote unquote, that they fight against. And because we have this term called pick-me's, we don't have a true argument. We don't have a true diverse perspective on what it means to be a Black American woman. And what I would like to cite here is Tony Kincaid.
So before we get into the next article, Quan, what you got?
All right, so I asked the question in the chat room. So now that we defined what tokenism was, has anyone ever experienced being a token? And we got a response from Kristen Green. I've been a token Black girl because I do not act like a typical Black girl, which sometimes was not always well received because I don't fit that urbane stereotype.
You got E on the urbane?
Gotcha.
E on the urbane.
So what we're about to do now is we're gonna go into the next article because it goes to your point about, people acquiescing to white American values and to white American standards and not understanding that level of pragmatism that they have is in a way a form of tokenism as it capitulates to oppression. Because when you are oppressed and when you are in a situation where you're being managed in that way,
you just hitting every word.
Ways that you navigate are already pre-thought out in that way. Because a lot of ways and a lot
I
of
want to fight with you. Why would you let me fight with you?
Man, let me get through it. You can fight with me.
All right.
Because in a lot of ways, people navigate and don't understand that the outcomes and the movements that they make have already been processed by the person who has facilitated the society. Now, I'm going to go into this article so we can get into the next conversation. What you got for me before we do
I was saying that as we go into the article, what was the person that commented?
Kristen Green.
Kristen Green, I would love for you, I'm seriously, don't out yourself. Don't make yourself uncomfortable at all. But for me as InquisitiveQ, because I am a very curious person, if you can, please articulate for me, what do you mean by that you were tokenized? Because for myself, as the Black Anglo-Saxon pulls this up, my experience, which we'll get into later, is that being a token is also people want you to be a safeguard for the system. They want
that cover.
That's that cover, yeah. They want you to safeguard, but more importantly, on the other side of it, though, and I don't think we talk about this enough, Black Americans also feeding the tokenism because they want you to represent Black America in a way in which Black America is not commonly presented. And what I mean...
Hold that thought, and we're going to open up with you after I read this article because you're getting into it. You're getting into everything, man. Stop moving so fast.
I don't want to slow down.
Slow your brain down, man. Calm. Little junkie.
I am. When it comes to information.
Yeah, man.
Lord, man.
I'm on the library like, what lines you got?
All right, so we done with that.
On fire, man.
We done with that. Now we here with it. What does it take to assimilate in America from New York Times by Layla Lalami. And again, this is from 2017. And again, my little notes here, we have, what does assimilation mean these days? The word has its roots in Latin simulare, meaning to make similar. Immigrants are expected over an undefined period to become like other Americans, a process metaphorically described as a melting pot. But what this means in practice, that's that mechanics, remains unsettled. After all, Americans have always been the heterogeneous population, racially, religiously, and regionally. By what criteria is an outsider judged to fit into such a diverse nation? For some, assimilation is based on pragmatic considerations, like achieving some fluency in a dominant language, some educational or economic success. We see that a lot. Some familiarity with the country's history and culture. For others, it runs deeper and involves relinquishing all ties, even linguistic ones, to the old country. For yet others, the whole idea of assimilation is wrongheaded, and integration, a dynamic process that retains the connotation of individuality, is seen as the better model. Think salad bowl, rather than melting pot. Each ingredient keeps its flavor even as it mixes with others. And I want to go, America is different from Europe in one significant way. It has long and successful history of integrating its immigrants, even if each new generation thinks that the challenges it faces are unique and unprecedented. And I'm going to say, let's keep it in American context, but I'm gonna jump into how the Irish, Jewish, Black immigrants and everybody has assimilated into whiteness and are technically white when they as how they move versus the phenotypical, ideological space that we're in. But go ahead and take the floor.
Basically, when you go back to the linguistics of the matter, it's why I go into these voices. Because when you go into these voices, people become more receptive of the things you have to say intellectually. And it's a film in the 1930s known as the Pygmalion. And it takes on the Greek mythos that Pygmalion creates this sculpture in which he falls in love with. And I do that because it's true. I listen to the world because I understand that when you begin to listen to the world instead of see the world, intonation, vocal inflection really tells you more about a person's social space than when you go into the phenotypes. And I bring that in because it's important to acknowledge Thomas Nast and the melting pot of Europe, and what you're going to go into, which I won't go divulge into, if you look into Thomas Nast, you'll see that the Irish community wasn't well accepted. The German community wasn't well accepted. So when we start to talk about America, America needs to understand and get out of this idea that, oh my God, we just became a nation. It's like, no, we had our revolution in 1776. That's why the July 4th is so important. But before July 4th, in 1610, we had the first legal case in which we have, I think it's James Punch. We had the first legal case in which we have three indigent servants, 2 white men, 1 black man, in which they diverged and divulged what's the difference between an African and a European. That was very important. But when we get into this tokenism, it's really about espousing America being important into the rest of the world and being like Ben Shapiro and saying the things that we need to say in the tones that we need to say them so that we're respected, because coming from the inner city, there's no way that you can have a quality education coming from a public school, in which it means that you have the same level of acumen of persons who fund themselves through private schools and through private education. And again, I'm very satirical in that. And when I say from personal experience that just because you go to a private school don't mean you're intelligent. Just because you come from a public school don't mean you're stupid. And when we look at life, life has no credential for intelligence. You can't get a PhD and go to life and go, life, I have a PhD, I am your Lord, I am your master. There's no such thing as looking at the future and telling me, well, you studied the past, you know the past very well, and the future goes, therefore you are a master of it. And what I mean by that is to say, is that in Black America, we over-prioritize Ivy institutions and not state institutions. We need to understand that America is about competition of institutions and not persons. And that's why I always say that people of the palm, white people, are not white in the sense that their phenotype is that they have less melanin. And that's again against my Black supremacy, because I will speak to Black supremacy. That's against, and I'm speaking to the camera. That's against my Black supremacy. Just because you have melanin doesn't mean you're qualified to tell me how to live. We need to get to, we as Americans need to get to a state of meritocracy. We need to get to the people who actually care about the matter, who study the matter, who understand the matter. Whatever plays us all to understand policy needs to be built upon a common, consistent, and bipartisanship, because bipartisanship is what carries America forward. Not racism, not sexism, not homophobia.
Identity politics.
Identity politics. It's about the person and the character that cares for more than themselves. They care about the whole because they find themselves within the whole.
And that leads me into when we talk about wholes. Wholes, and that is whole as in collective, not holes in this house.
I was going to say, Ludacris came into my home. Holes.
Got you. But when we talk about the collective and we talk about the Irish integrating into American society, as you mentioned, what people have a tendency to do is misunderstand whiteness. Because what happens is they look at the phenotypical aspect, which there is benefit in that, but what I will say is that even when you share that phenotype, you have to pay a price to get in.
Wait a minute.
Wait, let me go. You have to pay a price to get in the house.
Even as a white person?
Even as a white person.
I'm listening. You got my hand down.
Because when we talk about white people, we have white people who are abolished from the establishment. When we talk about, if we want to talk about contemporary figures, we can speak to if people don't know who Ralph Nader is, who was exiled from the DNC. If you don't know who Chris Hedges is, exiled from the New York Times. These are white men and white people who did not capitulate to the rules of engagement. So when we talk about how people matriculate and we look at this and bring it up to the current time in terms of Donald Trump in this polarized election, what people don't understand is this is a mechanism. So Latinos are the newest growing population in America. What people don't understand is that racism gets multiplied when we're integrating a new group of people, because what it does is it forces you to choose how you're going to be socialized and which route you're going to take in terms of, am I going to fall in line and abide by the rules of engagement and the institutions that are built on quote unquote slavery and African-American ADOS bodies, not Black immigrant bodies, because that's a whole different conversation. But am I going to capitulate to that and say, you know what, I'm going to do what I have to do in my everyday life? Because a lot of people would call, people who have critical acclaim tokens, but I want to bring it down to a very micro level. Me and you can be considered tokens, right? And because when we're talking about how the Irish, Jews, all other ethnic groups, whether it be Nigerians who have matriculated into American society under the same notion, and those when you talk about performing as the definition speaks to a performance. So when
doing?
you're having this performance and not necessarily holding the actual ideals, you become a token by default. So there are a lot of people who would like to, talk about how white people are an issue, but nobody ever stops to think and look at the idea, in fact, that we as everyday people also contribute to tokenism because we hold it up and reinforce that tokenism and quote unquote performance diversity is valid. So that is in itself a form of tokenism. But talk to me, I want to hear a little bit about your own views on how you feel like you're a token or not a token and how you interact with that.
I'm sorry, but you on the camera to think I'm performing, but really, I am so happy because we have discussions off camera, right? Me, Quan, Vaughn, we all have these discussions off camera because it's not a performance. And the reason I want to bring that gravitas, that somberness to the moment, that seriousness to the moment, is that this isn't a performance for YouTube. This isn't a performance for Instagram. Because this talks about Antonio Gramsci and Mussolini in the 20th century, in which Antonio Gramsci, who's in prison, talks about how fascism relies on the average person to participate. And because we have freed ourselves within this moment to say that we're not only talking about Black America, we're talking about the POC of America. We're talking about
POC is the new Black.
Not just, it is. We're not just talking about white America needs to change. We're talking about America needs to change. And before I go in, because oh Lord, I'm about to testify.
Don't go in too much, man.
I'm about to testify a little bit. I want to see.
You already got the jump. You on the pulpit.
Jesus!
Got it, man.
I want to see, have anybody respond in the comments before I go.
No, we're gonna have a section for that.
I want to acknowledge, before that, I want to acknowledge them though. Do we have anybody of significance, any comments of significance that we want to add before question? Yeah, because I don't want to ignore them.
No questions. They just said that the last remarks you made was a great point.
Okay.
Continue.
I don't know what the hell that is because I miss myself. But to your point, when we talk about how the other half lives, we don't know that that's a photo essay about how the Irish Americans were inside of slums inside of New York, where now it's a legal precedent that if you want to call it a bedroom, it has to have a window. We don't want to talk about how William Faulkner talks about, well, and as I lie dying, poor people can't afford to change their minds. William Faulkner is important to Black Americans through Toni Morrison and the Bluest Eye, and Toni Morrison's dissertation on the poverty in America through William Faulkner. We don't want to talk about in America how it is exceptional to have enough money in this day and time to not worry about Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump coming to a consensus about how we want to decide how we want to handle these evictions. We like to talk about how the poor Black American and the poor Latin American is suffering. We don't want to talk about from the hood to the holler, how the Red Sea is upset because most of the money is captured in the coastal America. We don't want to talk about how many poor white people exist in America. Because if we talk about how many poor white people exist in America, then we get down to Dr. King. And when he says in the Poor People's March, that it's not about Black, it's not about brown, it's not about white. I'm paraphrasing. It's about the economic position in which you sit in America. And we don't want to talk about the 400 years of poor white trash. And so in this moment in which we're talking about tokenism, not only are we talking about tokenism, we're talking about how American exceptionalism gets continued.
You mean Black excellence?
Exactly where I'm going. It gets continued through Black excellence. It gets continued through Ted Cruz.
So let me ask you this.
Let me put my soapbox on my wall. It gets continued through non-white faces. Because we love to say, and I say we, the left, love to say, oh, it's the white man, it's the white person. But we don't like to hear when James Baldwin talks about, oh, I understand why I don't like landlords. We don't talk about James Baldwin when he talks about why I stopped hating Shakespeare. We don't talk about James Baldwin when he understands that when you understand American history, you're no longer white, you're no longer black. We don't talk about when you understand how America is constructed and the labor exploitation that continues, that we are more alike in not having than we are alike in having. Now, I'm open to what you guys say.
No, so I just wanted to get into, because you mentioned the dynamic around people talking about old white men. We hear all the time now, like, white men this, white men that, white men this. And you know, they have their own things to reckon with. But what I'll say when we talk about tokenism, I would like to bring up to the floor white women in terms of being tokens, because that is the first level of diversity that happens before we even get into racial diversity. Because what happens is people don't necessarily understand that, again, it's not about race. It's about capitulating and acquiescing to an institution that doesn't necessarily hold your values, and you are performing. So right now, we have feminism, which is a huge movement. We have the whole thing around Black women being
third wave feminism. Third wave.
We have the whole thing around Black women being the backbone of the Democratic Party, and this whole dynamic around men are bad, women are good. And so, with that being said, again, when we talk about performance and we talk about the wage gap and all of those different things, what doesn't necessarily get acknowledged is, okay, white women are positioned immediately after white men in terms of economically and socially when you talk about access and power, right? But why is it that nobody ever refers to them as being a token or being perceived as a token? And I think it has a lot to do with the misunderstanding that it is only positioned into quote unquote race. Because and this is not all, some people do understand this, but what happens is, it's like, well, we have a wage gap conversation, and right now the DNC is performing diversity and performing to care about Black women when we had third wave feminism and we have all of these initiatives around women, but I don't see Black women's economic position increasing or their social capital, despite them leading and being the quote unquote most educated population within America, in spite of being and having all of these new businesses, in spite of having and being the matriarch of Black families as Black men have been removed, which is why they have had to become the backbone of the DNC, because your men were, again, positioned strategically for you to be the backbone of not only your own families, but white families. So are you also women, white women are tokens in one way, and then you have Black women who are now also becoming tokens in a very, and I'm highlighting that because this is what is the most I looked at and viewed right now in terms of this is what is leading the conversation and leading policy exchange and leading in a lot of different areas in terms of women. And so is that conversation, because I think people also don't understand politics in a way that your own ambitions can be used against you, as even though you may not see yourself as a token, because you want to move into that next space, I'm gonna cut my hair, I'm gonna, like you said, put on that voice to move up, but you may not see yourself as a token, but you are acquiescing to white standards. And when I say white standards, I'm talking about the institution of America, not white people. Whenever you hear me refer to that for the audience, always know that I'm talking about America as an institution. Whiteness is not about phenotype. Blackness and whiteness does not exist. It is a part of the institution that is America and was created to create a factory of tokenism.
Now I gotta jump in.
Jump
Lord Jesus, amen to everything you have said. Because this is where Black American women critique Black American men and the colorism that exists. Look at the squad. I'm talking about AOC. I'm talking about Iman.
Token.
I'm talking about all of them. We talking about tokenism, but AOC, because she is fairer than the rest of the squad, leads in critiquing
That's strategic.
It's the best strategic move. And that's where Black American men do not understand what Black American women mean by colorism. Because when I listen to Black American women, it always comes down to colorism. And not even just Black American women. My first experience with colorism, and I'm not going to lie to you, my first experience with colorism was 17, in which a Moroccan woman and an Algerian woman was vying for my attention to explain what it means to be an urban Black boy. That fetishization that happens to Black American men, especially when you can articulate yourself. Anyway, because that's why I don't understand most rappers when they say, all my bitches are foreign. It's like, shut up. No, seriously, when I'm going to say this to the camera, Black American men, I don't give a damn how light, how fair, how fine your woman's hair is. Every 28 days, I'm going to leave it there.
Women are women.
If you don't, un film es un film.
That's all you got to say.
And if you don't understand what it is I'm talking about, go to your social network in which you have real women, the one that's called the quote-unquote the B, who is honest with everyone and doesn't care about being excluded. Listen to what she has to say. Because to your point, Black American women are not listened to when they start talking about how white American women are duplicitous in the system. And I'm gonna keep going, and how we don't talk about how white American women, the book you got me, they were her property. How white American women are also actors within a capitalistic system. And we don't talk about how capitalism is also, again, about the exploitation of labor. And because it is the exploitation of labor, and because in America, labor is also tied to your social hierarchy, because you are white, because you are a woman, you are able to get away with certain behaviors. And that's why I always say, if you want to eradicate racism, you must eradicate sexism. Meaning that if you want to get rid of racism, you must no longer make it valuable that the white man is saving white women. And that's the reason why most Black American men were lynched. And whenever I hear a Black American man talk about, oh yeah, girl, I'm hung. Oh yeah, girl, I can do this and the third. They play into the stereotype of being a buck. They play into the stereotype of being this promiscuous man that doesn't have any control of his sexual libido, and it absolutely diminishes and destroys every single thing a Black American man who thinks about his mind versus his body does. Because tokenism in Black America, and I'm going to bring it down, tokenism in Black America, in which Donald Glover does well in the Atlanta series, a lot of Black American men like to silence Black American women once they get a little bit of money. And they think that they're entitled to Black American women's bodies because a lot of Black Americans come from poverty.
But let's have a hard conversation.
Ooh,
and why that happens. And why that happens.
I like those.
Because it's all about the game, right? So I have a darker fiance, Black, not what a person would consider like drop dead gorgeous, right?
But she is.
To me,
not just to you, to anybody who can see her. And I would say this only reason, because me as a man, any man that respects another man's love for a woman, you can see why you are appealed and attracted to the partner that you have chose. Her acumen intellectually as well as her fortitude emotionally.
But that gets into the whole thing about playing the game, though, being a token. and navigating in these ways in terms of the mechanics. Because what happens is when you talk about that breakdown in the familial structure of Black men and Black women, is you have a bunch of people trying to jockey for social capital as well as economic uplift. So because we're appealing to the standard of whiteness, when we talk about colorism, there is a rubric and there is measurements in terms of social precedent, in terms of how those things play out. So if you're doing everything that way, and this is where that pragmatism gets real tricky, because pragmatically, it's more intelligent for me to say, you know what? I know America values these things, so let me get
what are these things?
These things in general, in terms of whether it be how they look in terms of how I dress, how I appease people in that way, whether it be the skin complexion, whether it be the language and the diction that I'm using, anything that feeds into the quote unquote American standard. Okay. In terms of that ideological baseline. Gotcha. That everybody moves on in terms of when they say play the game.
White European standards.
Yes. Not even white European standards, because I would say just
now you got my interest.
Because as you always say, let's make it Anglo-American, because this is because as we as African Americans are a different breed of Blackness, which is why Black is and should be just coined for us. We have to understand that white Americans are a unique breed. The Anglo-American is a unique breed of whiteness.
I would agree.
And they aren't they aren't the same as a German, a Scottish, an Irish, and so on and so forth. So when we do that, the problem is everybody's going by that baseline. So if I'm making all of my decisions based on like, all right, cool, I have to dress this way, I have to talk this way, I then am tokenizing myself. Okay. Because I'm moving through it to, again, if you could visualize a slot machine, right? I gotta conform. That little narrow line that you gotta get that coin in, I have to conform to it to be able to pass through to access what is in the machine.
I got you.
I have to mold myself. And when you talk about families and the familial structures, if I am a man who is moving in a certain way and trying to access certain environments, and I know that these institutions don't quote unquote necessarily like darker women, I make the pragmatic decision, not even because I hate them, but because, again, I have to make this decision because I want to matriculate and I want success. And what people have to acknowledge is when you talk about marriage and partnerships and all of that, my brand becomes your brand. And when you talk about institutions, any institution, my brand is your brand. And to bring it back to community, as we always like to do.
Jump in. I'm ready. I'm listening.
As we always like to do, this is why we're saying that we have to move away from tokenism and the mechanics of tokenizing ourselves, in the mechanics of reinforcing whiteness. Again, America as the institution. Because part of the problem, while we can't necessarily bring America to the indictment of reconciliation for what it has done, not only to ADOS, American Descendants of Slavery, but everybody who they have matriculated into the machine within the process. But the problem is that everybody capitulates to the one cardinal rule in undermining ADOS. And they don't understand, like you were talking about that labor exploitation, and through that, you also undermine and devastate yourself.
I agree. I'm going to go ahead.
So we got our first response on the Facebook chat. So I asked the question, do you feel that Latinos share similar values for Black Americans? And Jordan Woodard responded in economics.
Hold on, what was the question?
It was, do you feel that Latinos share similar values with Black Americans?
And this is where I want to jump in with you.
What is it? Jump in.
Is that
I got where you're jumping.
We all in this motherfucker jumping. But what you were talking about, you know who wins from that fading into tokenism, but also playing that line? Obama. Who he has. Oh, I'm telling you now.
You a hater. You a crab in the barrel.
Wait a minute.
Stop it.
Oh, I can't be a crab in a barrel. You want to know why? Because I'm telling you here right now, Michelle, I don't know her last name as a maiden, but Michelle Obama was ahead of Barack Obama and decided that she understood what it meant to be a woman inside of America and took her efforts, her energy, and her understanding and helped Barack Obama. So when you start talking about Barack, you damn sure need to mention Michelle.
Because most people voted for Barack because of Michelle.
And because you have, let me continue, because you have to. You have to, and here's why you have to. It's not even just a whole brand, it's a whole narrative, it's a whole history. What Michelle Obama brought to the White House was the understanding that I can come from a working class family, I can be a woman, I can be black, but that damn sure don't mean I'm stupid. And that's why I will vote for Michelle in 2024.
Michelle got divorced from Barack.
Michelle could be Michelle could be 80 years old. The FLOTUS. Michelle Obama could be 90 years old, and I will campaign. You know, I was born up underneath the Hatch Act. For you who don't know what the Hatch Act is, look it up. I was born underneath the Hatch Act. I would have Michelle on me all damn day long because she understands what it means to come from a working class family. To your point about the Latino community, I used to have this thing about the Hispanic paradox because in sociological research, they talk about how there's this paradox within Hispanic families in which they're from lower economic values, however, that they still have better health outcomes than the Black Americans. However, looking at the NIH and what's the National Institution of Health research, the NIH research is like we have to question the Hispanic paradox because it's not necessarily the same. But when you start talking about the economic aspect, we have to talk about Ted Cruz, and we have to start talking about the Goya protest. With America's about hustle, right? We all hustle. When we talk about the American history, and more importantly, the phrase manifest destiny, we need to talk about how America expanded from the Eastern Shore all the way to the West, in which a lot of families were Mexican. California, Los Angeles, City of Angels, and all that other stuff, it's not. Mexicans is Spanish. But more importantly, what we have to get into when we start talking about Latinx, in these communities is that the same problems that we face inside of the Black American communities about how Black American men are subjugated to white American men ideals, and which I mean by, I agree with your whole thing. The white American ideals is that the professional father is the father that's seen as the good father, and we don't like the trade father. So Mexican American men and women comes down once again to colorism. When America, you have to understand that color matters a lot. It matters a lot. If you had going back to the phenotype, if you had the phenotype that makes people relax, if you have the skin texture, the skin color, the hair texture that makes people feel that you're credible in what you're saying, people are willing to feed and are economically incentivized to go against their darker brethren and their darker family members. And that goes back again to the Moroccan and the Algerian I was talking about. Because the Algerian woman brought up to me, and I mean these women were not that much darker than each other. They're both olive. They were both olive. And when I mean by olive, I mean undertone for those who are in fashion who understand makeup. You understand what I mean by olive undertone. If they spent time in the sun, it would get dark. So the Algerian woman, because she was fairer, was saying that she was more superior to the Moroccan woman. And why I bring that up is that we need to get outside of everything that's wrong with Black America. It's just a Black American issue. It's an issue along the global scale because we have to, going back to Anglo-American capitalism comes from England. And when you understand the British Empire, we need to stop arguing against ourselves as POC and non-POC and get into where all of us are fighting narratives that is stem from this small-ass island in Europe. We're really talking about how white people have rejected, not just white people, but white people in power have projected upon everyone else their standards of credibility, therefore their standards of what is valuable, therefore who is willing and who is able to survive. We have to get into the discussions, and when we go into diversity and inclusion, and say, just because you stem from a certain region, just because you stem from a certain society, just because you stem from a certain history, does not mean in identity politics that you are willing to take in consideration the whole of the people. And that's where America is suffering from, and when it comes down to leadership. People are not willing to consider the whole of the people. And going back to Black America, when it comes down to Black American men and women need to get into, in our private quarters, where we listen to each other and say, you know what? Although you are dark, although you are light, I hear in the ways in which they're treating you. That is not fair. How can we, as Black American men, Black American women, no matter how we are along the color spectrum, no matter our pigment, how can we combat people who are willing to think that we are incompetent because we're not there?
And I'll just add this to that, as I agree 100%. But I would tell Black women, African American women, that when you have men who are taking those stances and are willing to step out in front of you, embrace that. Because part of the conversation that I hear now is Black women are unprotected, right? To some extent, I understand and agree with that. But what happens is, again, because it's absent of the historical context and everything leading up to it, it's like, understand that you are unprotected for very, very, very rational, pragmatic reasons for the institution to use you in that way. So, like, I've been in situations where I have taken certain stances and I do identify and, you know, am empathetic towards Black women, but I have also told Black women that you have to play the game. Like, you got to do this and do that. And what I'm trying to get them to understand is, like, me playing a game means I have to do something that goes against you and the whole collective. So when I am doing and saying what I say, I need you to step out the way. And that's not in the sense that, again, women can fight, but do you want to? The question becomes, do you want to and should you have to? Let that be my job. I understand I don't agree with the whole equality thing, as men and women will always be different, but we have to have a certain level of respect that just helps us understand that even in those differences, we all deserve the same level of treatment and respect. But saying that you want to be equal and positioning yourself in the quote unquote masculine position, and I'll use the economy to kind of help frame what I'm talking about. So on one hand, women want access to the economy, they want jobs, they want all those things. And I have nothing against that, right? You want economic access at the same par, if not higher than men. But understand though, what that comes with. When you do that, you also assume the role of being a provider in the way that a man would, because of how the economy and the social construct moves around that. To your point, when you were talking about the labor and how the labor moves into all of those, as that's why we have policies around family leave and all of those different things, because the family life influences all of that. So if you're going to say, yes, I want all of these things on par with men, you also can't hold men to the same traditional standards of saying you have to protect me in that way, because we have to define what is protection.
I agree.
Because if we're evolving
I agree.
as a society while we're having a conversation around tokenism, Because again, how are we defining these things? As time moves, how are we talking about these concepts that have existed, but exist in a very, very, very different way than a past, because we have these conversations again. America did not have in the past a very diverse demographic that would register Mexicans in a way that you would come up on a census tract, or women having access to anything as they got their rights at the same time as black people, even white ones. So when we have these discussions, you have to put it in a frame of, this is a very different social and economic construct that we're in. So when we're talking about tokenism, when we're talking about equality, when we're talking about even blackness, which is why I made this statement about black POC is the new black, is because people of color also signifies what blackness, quote unquote, has evolved into. As blackness, when America was first created, was specifically to identify the slave. Black is the slave. It has evolved over time, but that's what that is. And so when people are having these conversations, part of it gets lost because of the narratives are so, they aren't anchored in anything. And people want to be fluid in everything. And you can't have that level of fluidness when you're talking about trying to propose solutions to a whole.
I get you.
Because what happens is there's so much overlap there. And I get black women, and I love black women, and I prefer the angrier black woman, because again, going back into the tokenism, the tendency is higher for you to be, quote unquote, a capitulator if you are that person who isn't the angry black woman. Because going back historically, all of us should be angry.
Yes.
Like people love quoting like James Baldwin and all these other people, but again, what good is it to quote this person whose work is still relevant in today's time?
I get you, and that's what I call the taxidermy of black leaders and white leaders. It's like, I'm not who I am because you have divorced me of my politics. And to your point, I want to go on a diatribe, right? And not even a diatribe, a tangent. When you talk black women, right? Because in my head, black American woman, and I have dealt with a lot. There's no tender understanding more than a black American woman who understands what you're going through. No one's more tender than what you're going through. No one's more understanding what you're going through. No one is more open to what you're going through than a black American woman. And to me, that is my personal advice.
I was about to say, I disagree.
But again, you have to find a black American woman who understands what it means to be a black American woman versus
that I agree with.
Versus the black American woman who's appealing to have the other women have.
Ooh, and that's the heaviest difference.
And that's the difference. I don't play with the House of Mirth. When I talk about Edith Wharton with that, I don't play with women who like to play the same game men play. I have more than you, therefore I'm happier than you. That's not real. That's not reality. You know, and let's talk about my tokenism. Let's talk about me being inside of rooms in which there's a Supreme Court justice and a chief technology officer of United States of America, in which the CTO cannot respond to what a justice says. And anybody who wants to fact check me, please fact check me. I would love if you did. Because in fact checking me, you will see the credibility of what I mean by my experiences, and that I've been to places in which you got black American women who can't find a damn date, but will tell you that they're better than everybody else at these gala after parties. And when you find white American men with a bald head black American woman with a vast degree, who is dark. When you find all these, and here's where I get upset with black America, and I'm at this point in time, I'm frustrated with black America. Stop bringing up to me your experiences, because they don't mean shit to me. I've been inside of this beltway for long enough and I've had enough experiences to understand, no matter whether you affluent or non-affluent, doesn't mean your life is better than me or better than mine. It's all about your personality. And that's where the identity politics get into. Identity politics is the shortcut towards character. And they like to believe because I am a certain person and I'm of a certain character that I'm viable. But you can, as Audre Lorde goes into a black lesbian women in queer theory of black feminism, talks about not only just black American women, but a white American woman in her name Zambi, talks about a white American woman walking away from an abusive husband, but because Audre Lorde was a black American woman, did not see refuge or did not see that she was a helping party and help her to escape abuse. So when we start talking about this dichotomy between the black American man and the black American woman, we need to revisit James Baldwin and Nikki Giovanni in 1971. We need to revisit Maya Angelou and Richard Pryor, in which Richard Pryor is drunk and Maya Angelou talks about the suffering of the black American woman and seeing the black American man not necessarily fulfill his potential. We need to revisit the damnation of a woman, in which W. Du Bois over 100 years ago talks about how black American women have been forced to let go of their own lives to support the lives of men, which Zora Neale Hurston talks about the mule of men. But we also need to visit Tony Kincaid in the 1960s when we start talking about how there are black American women who participate in white supremacy because they never see and have the material wealth of white women than to understand the fight there is for black Americans in the woman anthology. And the reason I bring that up is back to your point, is that political identity politics does not feed anyone.
Nope.
We need politicians who are focused upon the problems that face Americans, not just white Americans, not just black Americans, not just Latino or Latinx Americans. And when we start talking about sexism, and this is, I'm gonna go there, we need to stop talking about white problems. We need to start talking about the white woman who's mad at her husband because she can't have an industry that's for profit, because she can't compete with her nephew. She can't compete with her cousin that's a man. She can't compete against her uncle. She can't compete against her father. So she starts a nonprofit that quote unquote help the underprivileged and underrepresented. If you can't compete against the people in your household, you have no right to come outside of your household until, in which we call this tone policing, how everyone else is supposed to participate, in which we call the American dream. When we get down to tokenism in its performative, in its mechanisms, is really a policing in which Frantz Fanon talks about the wretched of the earth, the colonized intellectual. We need to, and when I say we, I mean the collective masses should understand that supremacy in its mindset is not located within a phenotype, within an ideology, because I possess something that you don't have, a negative integration technique, because I maybe have darker skin or I have blue eyes, Toni Morrison, because I have some phenotype that you don't have, that means I'm superior to you. Once you get outside of that ideology of a phenotype defines who and what you are, no matter the curl of your hair, no matter the shape of your eyes, no matter the complexion of your skin, we begin to get into the deeper understanding of what it means to be human and what it means to care about other people. But because we're so caught on colorism, because we're so caught on hair texture, most of the nuance that goes into policy is overlooked because most people are looking for, oh, this person looks like me. And because this person looks like me, they want to represent me. In which we all know that political actors, although may seem superficial, are not.
But that's a great segue into
I'm listening.
What was the next talking point in terms of Tokenism. I don't know if you got the what do you call it? The link for it. But Death of a Nigga Boy is at Politics and Prose. Everybody go check that out. If you want to support Gilded Sages, that is a way. We definitely are trying to be, or no, not I'm trying to be. I'm a thought leader. I'm a thought leader. I just gotta fight enough to get out here and make people hear it.
Thought or thought?
Both. No, I'm not a thought.
I'm a thought.
I can't be a thought. I'm about to be married in like 2-3 months. So I can't be thoughted up. I'm a thought.
I'm a thought.
Thoughts with a UGHT leader.
T-H-O-T.
This I'm about to bring up here for y'all, what y'all gonna see is the next article, or not article, this is the book, Death of a Nigga Boy, written by myself in tandem and in help with this beautiful gentleman right here sitting down, Quentin Horton. Thank you for the alley-oops. So we gonna get into it, right? The tokenism algorithm, and I use algorithms in the book to speak to how it is a program, right? And how these behaviors produce certain outcomes, and how it's more of a Rubik's Cube when you talk about social and political engineering, right? And so that's the whole algorithm piece of it. So the tokenism algorithm furthers the inequities created by coerced acceleration, assimilation, because it justifies the suppression or signifiers of blackness. Thus, ADOS, American Descendants of Slavery, who are within white institutions that use the algorithm, seem to aid whiteness in circumventing economic and human rights claims of the descendants of slaves. Reinstating the cultural heritage of ADOS has the potential to complicate the contemporary and overused narrative that Black America needs to achieve more before its population's concerns are taken seriously. The harvested portion of the ADOS heritage are its cultural expressions, rap, the fashion, all of that. So for all of y'all who love to say we ain't got no culture while you wearing and rocking our stuff, cut it out. We are American culture. This junk was motherfucking soup with no spices, boy, until we got here. Slaves, nigga. But as I continue, the harvested portion of ADOS heritage are its cultural expressions that elevates character traits such as resilience and hope to virtues. Black excellence. This is not exceptional, as the human spirit has the capacity to overcome seemingly impossible odds to achieve what was previously conceived as impossible. What is exceptional about the ADOS is that we can utilize learned resourcefulness to build capacity of Black America. And I should have put America as a whole when I look at that in retrospect. An effort to usher in better circumstances, though current circumstances are bleak. So, let me go ahead and dig into that a little bit, right? So, back to the behaviors, back to the standard of whiteness of the British Empire, where the sun never sets. We have Anglos who have transitioned into Anglo-Americans, which are quote unquote white, our contemporary white Americans. What happens is when we go into these spaces, white institutions, we devalue our own capital, whether it be culture, whether it be socially. And I'll use myself as an example. When I go into a space or certain jobs that I've had to get, I have to denounce Tone. And I say Tone as my nickname for the quote unquote person who would be out on the block selling drugs, or the person who would be frowned upon by all communities, whether Black, white, Asian, and so on and so forth. Tone is the avatar, the emblance of what is frowned upon. And so I have to denounce Tone to move up. As I have to show my allegiance to the institution so that they understand that I am in ideological line step with what it is they're doing. So to your point, the book Death of a Nigger Boy was framed around trying to deconstruct identity politics, as I believe it is a poison, as I believe political correctness is a poison. Those things I have great disdain for. But to your point, we have to begin to understand that when we go into these institutions, whether they be, and I don't even believe that we have Black institutions in the way that people think, because they all, to again exist, have to capitulate to the standards, policies, and rules of engagement that are already in place and that already exist. You've reinforced both narratives at the same time that you do that. So you reinforce the algorithm on top that says, this is the standard, whiteness is the standard, and then you also at the same time condemn it. Creating what a lot of people, which will produce that as we talked about it in the past, a paper about the glass ceiling, because I left that out of Death of a Nigger Boy. That was a poem that I wanted, but the glass ceiling is there because of that. Because you are casting away that level of social capital or that narrative because of whatever reason, whether you're ashamed of it or whether you just have acknowledged that I have to do this to move up. I'm not really here to debate on why you're doing what you're doing, but I want people to understand what they're doing still has the same and produces the same outcome as, and that's why I framed it in the term of algorithms. All games, hear me now, all games come to an end. When you play Sonic, when you play Mario, when you play football, basketball, Fortnite, every game and program has an end. My question for people is, what is your end game? And this goes back to what we were talking about at the top. Is not necessarily being a token and taking on certain stances. What is your end game? What is your intent? Because again, people could say I'm a token. I'll say I, in some ways, have been a token. I tokenize myself and allow myself to be used, but I will say that I have allowed myself to be used for what I felt like was the greater good of the collective. Because as I tell people, when I walk into the Wilson building, when I walk into any government office, when I walked into any nonprofit, when I was doing my stuff with DC Achievers, I've always made a point to stay true and authentic to myself so that not only I can get in the door, but maybe Lord Tone, who the person I grew up with in the same class that had the same type of stats, and he ain't a bad guy, but maybe let's increase his odds. That's it. That's always been my approach to it in terms of talking about ourselves. That's always been my approach to it. So like, I just like sometimes I'm a dramatic person. So certain things are just me. Like when I'm using certain words and things of that nature, that's just me. I don't do that out of trying to capitulate. In some ways, I use it as a defense mechanism because apparently people like being disrespected kindly. because it's true. Because again, we're talking about also the collective and how they're engaging with it. Because we have Joe Biden right now. We have Donald Trump right now, right? And the argument is, well, one person is a lesser evil, and this is just one of the arguments. One person is a lesser evil because of his racism is palatable. And this goes back, again, to that narrative. Who will be protecting it? Are we protecting the institution? Or are we protecting our collective interests? Because Joe Biden protects America. Joe Biden protects the narrative that America is diverse, that America is embraceful of change and all of these different things. But does he believe in that? And from his track record, which unfortunately I don't necessarily, I have a small one, but not in the sense of developing policy and being in those type of positions. He, as a white man, right now, I would say, being used as a token.
Who, Joe Biden?
Joe Biden, arguably Donald Trump. Because the thing about Donald Trump,
I would say scapegoat, but I got you.
Same difference.
And
that's interesting.
Yeah, and that's how I was kind of, because they kind of overlap in a way.
They do. Because and this is where I would jump in.
Go ahead.
You know River Road, what I mean by River Road Congressional.
Mm-hmm.
When I say the Great Lawn and I talk about country clubs, you've seen it. And here is my critique of Black America. And I'm going to go there. Black Americans don't like the Black American. And this goes through Ernest Gaines. And this is the most of the problem that Black Americans face. It's saying that you literally exalt people, white people, on a pedestal that they don't put themselves on. And I want to say that to Black America. Woo! Black America,
Truth bomb.
You put a lot of white people on pedestals that they would never put themselves on.
And they don't like it.
And not only do they not like it, they look at you and go like, I'm still a human being. I know the difference between someone kissing my ass and someone actually appreciating me. White Americans don't like to be lied to because they are human beings. That said, you literally seen the places I've been. Mm-hmm. You literally seen the things that I've done. And to your point, I've always walked into the room. Literally, we know in this room, I kind of don't give a damn. It's like when it comes down to the intellect, it's like being intellectual is boring to me. Being intelligent is boring to me. Being able to articulate myself in a way in which most white Americans are appreciative of, as well as Black Americans, is boring to me. Why? Because I know as a Black American male, unless I have the things in which things in which Black Americans respect, wet ass pussy, and the things in which Black Americans respect, slob on my knob, in which Black Americans respect spinners, and having all of the materialistic things in which, and let's see, the Tocqueville talks about.
Stop being an elitist.
I don't give a shit. As being in, and let's see, the Tocqueville talks about is in the materialism of democracy and of America. Because I don't have the materials, you won't give me the respect of being in a position in which is speaking for you with the acumen that is necessary to prevent and provide policy. Prevent policy that is against you and provide policy that is for you. And because Black America is so self-conscious and so inferior and within its own mind to white America, and will not listen to white Americans and say, that's the man, not necessarily, just because I'm white doesn't necessarily mean I have the protection for the protection. Because Black Americans don't want to see James Baldwin as James Baldwin, but want to see James Baldwin as white America puts, or white liberalism puts James Baldwin. We're constantly putting these silos in which you have to perform a certain behavior to be accepted and being seen as credible as a Black leader. And therefore, Black America wants a white supremacist in Black skin. I don't give a damn. Dave Chappelle already talked about it. Clayton Bisbee. But that said, is that I am at the point in which we talk about tokenism, is that tokenism, as we were saying earlier, isn't just about Black. Tokenism is about carrying on this narrative of American exceptionalism. And tokenism is about carrying on this narrative that pull up yourself by your bootstraps. Even though Bill Gates argued against this self-made image, tokenism is really about people in this rugged individualism that we know that doesn't exist. And this is my indictment in my verdict of Black Americans in our, because I can't excuse myself in culture, in our envy of what white America has been able to accumulate within the last 400 years, it has not accepted that white America is not the epitome for a happy life. And once you begin to understand that white America is not the epitome for a happy life, no longer does your frustration and your angst come from wanting to mimic white lives. Hashtag relationship goals. Hashtag goals. You begin to understand Black excellence, which is cloak white supremacy. Cloak white supremacy. What you begin to understand is that the critiques of persons who say that Black Americans just want to be rich and want to be wealthy are viable. But more importantly, you begin to understand that Black Americans who purport to be leaders of Black America are not leaders of Black America, but are the draining stop, are the backstop to poverty in America. They are the people who say, I come from a harsh background, therefore everyone else should be able to do it. And the duplicity of that is that we don't put Barack Obama in the same lens that we do Clarence Thomas. Mm-hmm. And because we're not willing to do that, and because we're not willing to be that critical of those who purport to use the Black lineage for political clout, Black America, again, stymies itself, hinders itself, holds back. I'm coming to you after this comment. It holds itself back to this very visceral cycle of I am inferior, instead of understanding, wait a minute, I'm participating in a system in which my actions and my behaviors are not recognized by the larger whole, which means that I am not inferior. However, my contributions to the whole are being seen as inferior. Therefore, I am treated as if I'm inferior. In other words, and I know we go about this, but in other words, I'm not inferior. You think I am.
So with that being said, man, we're going to move into the next segment. We'll have like a brief, just kind of talking session, talking it out. But for everybody who is watching, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to the Sage community for coming out on this Saturday night, having a conversation with us. Man, if you can, like the video, comment, share the video, please, just in terms of support. Again, we are trying to have the conversation, build on the outside of, quote unquote, what people will call establishment institutions. So please do that. That goes a long way in terms of helping me galvanize. Quan, did you drop the links in there?
So I had to shorten it because it don't allow you to put that in.
That's cool. So my Quan just dropped a link in the chat. If you want to call in, man, we want to have some conversations. If you want to engage, again, you don't necessarily got to agree. We just want to have a conversation. Have these hard topics because I don't think that we'll get anywhere moving forward. But call in. The Zoom link is there in the comments section. I am right here, so if you call in, we can have that conversation. And by the time, let me ask you this, Quan. What are your thoughts on tokenism, bro?
So when I was researching, because I wanted to make sure that I looked into a lot of it, and I wanted to look into it for something that was relevant to our time. One of the things that I found when I really did my research on tokenism was it went back to Dukakis versus Bush and how they used Willie Horton's image in order to essentially take that whole election. Because what you saw was George Bush was losing on all fronts until they discovered that, hey, this dude Dukakis is letting a fugitive out on the weekends, and he's raping people and doing all of these type of things. And when they put the image of Willie Horton on the screen, it literally flipped a whole election. And when we talk about tokenism and how images are used, because another image was a Time magazine image of Robert Sandfield, whose nickname was Yummy, the little boy that was put in Chicago. He was put on the Time magazine, and that image was used as the super predator 90s whole ordeal of how Black Americans are to blame for a lot of the issues. Because what happened in that situation was a little boy was committing crimes because he joined a Black gang, and all you heard was that narrative. And what happens when you have tokenism is that you have people that matriculate up. But like I always say, the policy is written in America through the lens of the bottom caste. So they're not writing policies with the intention of, okay, I know that my Black friend is exceptional and that this is what you can become. They're writing policies and using imagery of the people we leave behind. The Robert Sandfields, who was mother was absent, father was absent, and got into a gang and was, pretty much committing crimes since he was 8 years old, died as an 11-year-old. Mm-hmm. But his face is plastered on Time magazine as the whole narrative of the super predator. And I'm pretty sure that the people that were perpetuating super predator, they knew upstanding Black people. They saw those people, but they still ran with that narrative because policies are written for that bottom caste.
Gotcha.
And that's what wins elections. We're seeing it right now. You turn on Fox News right now, they're highlighting criminality. These things are repeating themselves over and over because of the fact that when you feed that tokenism machine and you constantly have to battle with the fact that I have to disconnect from this. When you disconnect, that social capital is now gone.
Mm-hmm.
And once it leaves, it seldom ever comes back.
I would say you have, in the sense that I think what you're getting to is, again, even though you may not have necessarily experienced it in a very overt way, we all lose a certain level of social capital in a way. Because again, the whole narrative around being a quote unquote sellout or a coon or any of those things for having certain stances or, quote unquote being an elitist for asking people to, have a standard or a particular line of thought out of wanting to get the collective matriculation rather than the individual matriculation. You do lose some of that capital in that way. Yeah. And that's part of the reason for me why I kind of let me step back a little bit, because what happens is in the overall, and again, this goes back down to the intent. In my overall intent, it just doesn't work for me. Because in the end, I know if I capitulate to a certain point, a lot of people are like, play the game. It's like, look, I play the game to a certain point, y'all gone. I'm gonna devour y'all. Because in the end, son, the game is built on y'all backs. Y'all say it all the time. So that means that when I start playing, yeah, son, you don't, like you said, you don't matter. So part of it is, again, that quote unquote, for lack of a better word, that soft tokenism that the masses participate in is like, son, you all have to stop endorsing and reinforcing these singular ideologies and stances in terms of, or representations of how something should look or how something should come, in terms of when you're willing to give into it, or when you're willing to support it, or when you're willing to listen to it. Because unfortunately, there are a lot of people, you know, who deliver it. I would never be so arrogant to believe that, you know, I'm unique in the message that I'm trying to deliver to people, as people have been trying to preach this shit since the beginning of humanity. You know, so it is what it is, but at the same time, you know, people are part of the problem, and I don't see any call-ins popping up or anybody trying to enter the chat. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and, you know, I appreciate everybody for coming out, you know, having this conversation and talking about tokenism with us. The only thing I would leave everybody on is, you know, in terms of how you're engaging in society, always think about how are my behaviors potentially weaponized against me?
Yes, that's
right. How is this thing that I may be doing out of best intent being used against my collective good? Because understanding nobody operates as an individual, you will never be rich, wealthy, or any of that without the social capital or without the foundational pillars of a community. And right now, we do not have a Black community. Point blank, period. Go ahead, sure.
Can I add? So, and another thing people have to realize, everything's political. Everything that you do is political. And if you gain that mindset of everything being political, then you can learn how to move and engage things on a daily basis. Because that's part of the issue, is that we just engage, not realizing everything is political and being used to create narratives. So the quicker that we learn that everything that we do is political, and even the smallest of things that you might not think about is part of the political process, that you can help, that is also something that I feel people have to realize, is that throughout your daily life, the small things are what engaging politics is all about.
Yeah, and I think that's a good note to end on. As you know, voting is like 20% of the battle. There's a whole process, like you mentioned, leading up to that, and that goes into, you know, the music. And for those who, you know, I know people are probably going to watch this and be like, oh, yeah, we're against the WAP or Black man. It's like, nah, do you understand that it has a consequence? It has a consequence to it, whether you want to or not. You know, I would love for America not to be sexist and racist, but it is. And so with that being said, again, like the video, please share the video, please comment, talk to your friends about us, have conversations, you know, help us out in that way. And you're like, girl, these boys up here talking about they wild. Please send them our way, man. I want all of the smoke. We need the smoke. I need the smoke. I love the smoke. You know what I'm saying? So again, much love. Appreciate the Sage community coming out to enjoy us, love us, appreciate us. Enjoy the rest of your evening, beautiful people. And we out.